Hello, everybody, and welcome into episode 11 of the Emmitt Sevores Show. Today, I'm joined by Noah Boelter at Noah Boelter TV. Squabo says, however you know him, I'm joined by Noah. Noah, how are you doing, my friend?
I'm good, man. I'm good. How you doing?
I'm doing good, doing good. I'm excited to do these, to kind of start doing this series of mock drafts. The draft is probably like my favorite outside of the NFL season. I'm not a huge fan of free agency. I think that there's always this huge build up behind it, but I never feel like it's not like NBA free agency where it really is crazy. And same with like the NFL trade deadline. But the draft is really it's one of the best because especially, you look at the NBA, maybe you have like a couple of blue chip prospects and the rest of the guys don't really play. They're bench guys, role players. MLB draft, they're 3-4 years away. But in the NFL, like when you talk about somebody who wins like rookie of the year, like Sauce Gardner did, like Garrett Wilson did. Like these are guys who are with Sauce top 10 at his position and Garrett Wilson like top 20 at his position in the league in a league where everybody's running 3 wide receiver sets. Like it's very, very impressive. And so I think that it translates a little bit more. So it's a little bit more exciting. What are your thoughts on the draft?
Well, I think it's even more than that. You touched on like the top end of the draft because both of those guys were top first half of the first round picks, right? Both of those guys were top 10 picks. What
Yeah.
what I think is really exciting about the draft is that you don't even have to have a first round or second round or even a third round pick. You don't have to have a day for 1 or 2 pick in order to have a huge impact on your team. Was there something like greater than 50% of teams' rosters are composed of like late round draft picks? And these are the nuts and bolts. These are the guys who make a name who don't already have one. Even you get into some of the undrafted picks, undrafted free agents are some of the best players in NFL history, or at least have been. Obviously it's a diamond in the rough. It's not every guy, but you find them and it's exciting to find them and to everyone loves to be that guy like, oh yeah, I saw this one coming. I saw that one coming. That's what the draft is all about, is seeing guys make an opportunity for themselves, especially because you talk about NBA, MLB, they're all grinds. All professional sports are grinds, but the NFL, man, you're not only sacrificing all your time and your effort and working your tail off, but you're risking your life. You're risking your mental stability later in life. And if you don't make it, there's just that much more at stake because you could be making it so that you're injuring yourself to being ineligible for other positions or other jobs elsewhere. So it's just because of the high stakes, because of the opportunity, because of the effort and the character of people going for this, it's so exciting.
Yeah, I agree. But let's get into it. Let's start with we'll start obviously at pick 1. We'll use the PFF mock draft simulator here. We'll start off with pick number 1. That's the Carolina Panthers. They traded up. They traded a haul. They got, obviously, like we won't really know if they got fleeced until this entire process plays out, right? Maybe the quarterback that they wind up taking is just winds up being the best player of all time, and then we look back on it like, oh, you know what, that wasn't too bad of a trade for him. But as of right now, they wound up giving up, I think it was DJ Moore. They wound up obviously flipping first round picks, giving him a first round pick next year. I think there was a second involved or so. That they gave up a lot of picks. They gave up DJ Moore. It's kind of mind blowing what they did. Obviously the entire thing with them, it seems, is that they want CJ Stroud is the one that I'm hearing, is the one that I'm seeing the most. But they've come out recently and kind of said that they're, Frank Reich made it a point that they're not really, they're not out on Bryce Young. He kind of mentioned the fact that like he likes bigger quarterbacks, or that was the narrative. And he's like, that's not necessarily true. And the fact that he came out and said it makes me buy it, or makes me like buy that even less in them going in Bryce Young. So I think Bryce Young's completely off their board. Will Levis has been completely sliding and falling. So then it really leaves CJ Stroud and Anthony Richardson. And again, this is just my opinion on it, but I'll ask you first. Do you see CJ Stroud as like a potential generational talent at quarterback?
Absolutely not. And here's why. I make the comparison. I think there's a real chance CJ Stroud goes first overall, but I think he's going to end up more like the Baker Mayfield pick than a great pick. And part of the reason I'm saying that is because you look at this amazing year he's coming off of. He had 41 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. Who does that sound like? Sounds like Baker Mayfield senior year when he had 43 touchdowns and the same amount of interceptions. So he had 2 more touchdown passes, same amount of interceptions. Baker Mayfield was better in his last year. Everyone's looking at his game against Georgia and they're like, oh my gosh, he's this generational talent. He had a great game. There's no question about that. But this guy, he has kind of like a weird, stocky kind of body. He's 6'3", 218. Baker Mayfield, 6'1", 220. Like, they're comparable. And then what I do, where I'll give CJ Stroud credit is I like his composure. I like his attitude better than Baker Mayfield, because Baker Mayfield definitely has this whole, like, I'm better than you, crotch grab towards the sideline kind of thing, like F you kind of thing. And I don't think CJ Stroud has that, which will help him. But I think if you take CJ Stroud too early and you expect him to be some world changer, he is going to turn out like the Baker Mayfield pick, kind of like a Sam Darnold pick, where it's like if he was given the right situation, if he fell a little bit, if he didn't have those expectations and he had a supporting cast, he would have been better. But I think if you take him too early, he'll be a bust.
Yeah, I agree. I do. And here's the way I really look at this. I'll make the pick first. My pick's Anthony Richardson at number 1. And here's my thought process behind this. A lot of it really has to do with what the San Francisco 49ers did a couple of years ago. They traded all the way up to 3 for Trey Lance. And why is that so important? Because, they're obviously, they didn't trade up to 1. Here's the thing. In this quarterback, or in this class, I don't think we have a generational quarterback, because I think all of them there's no Trevor Lawrence or Joe Burrow in this class where they're very clearly the number 1 and the draft really starts at 2. Like, that doesn't happen. I also believe had the Jets had the 3rd pick, and I think it was the Dolphins had number 2, I think that the Niners are trading up to 2 and still drafting Trey Lance. Like, I think that was the number 2 guy on their board, obviously behind Trevor Lawrence. But I think that that's the guy that they wanted. They, like, Zach Wilson. It wasn't, they were like, oh, we're missing out on Zach Wilson. That's the guy they wanted. They wanted to pick a guy who has these elite traits, because they could have taken my comp for CJ Stroud at 3. They could have taken Mac Jones, a guy who has had, I think, the best protection in the league. When we talk about CJ Stroud, he had the best protection in college last year. That was in Mac Jones at Alabama had that. CJ Stroud throughout his tenure has had weapons on weapons on weapons, right? Marvin Harrison Jr., Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, obviously Jackson Smith and Jigba this year. Like, he's had a lot of weapons. And so I think that he's been propped up by his supporting. That's not me saying that he's going to be bad, but I don't see him as a generational talent or prospect. And when you trade all the way up to 1, I think you have to look for that. You're not going up to number 1 to draft a potentially better, like, he's obviously, I think, a little bit better of an athlete. He's also built bigger than Mac Jones. I don't think you trade all the way up to 1 to take a guy who's, like, highest is like, yeah, he can be good. Like, I don't think that's what you do. I think you swing for the fences, and that's what I think they're doing here with Anthony Richardson. Again, I think it's probably more likely than not them going to be going with CJ Stroud, but I think the amount of draft picks that they gave up, it's very reminiscent of that Trey Lance trade, where they traded all the way up to number 3 to get the guy who has the traits, who they think can wind up being a superstar. Obviously, it hasn't worked out with Trey Lance so far, because he's only started, I think, 3 or 4 games. But it's definitely very possible, because we all kind of, like, look at that trade like, oh, that was that was a very dumb trade. But I think we could wind up looking back on it and it not being so bad if Trey Lance winds up working out. So I haven't taken Anthony Richardson 1 overall. What do you think?
Well, I don't think it's as crazy as a lot of people are going to paint it to be, right? What I look at this draft, and with the 5 quarterbacks that are on the top of this draft, what does this remind you of? It reminds you of 2018. It reminds you of when we had Sam Darnold, Josh Rosen, Baker Mayfield, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, right? Yeah. Who went last in that draft? Lamar Jackson. He was the super freak athlete outside of a Josh Allen. Like, there were 2, but the super freak athlete who was, like, super quick and rushes and doesn't pass the ball as much, the comp for Anthony Richardson is Lamar Jackson. And out of that draft class, Lamar Jackson's the only one with an MVP to his name. So at least he has an argument, even if his team, like, he's comparable, his success versus Josh Allen. If you were to take one of them right now, it'd be up in the air. You'd probably take Josh Allen, but Lamar Jackson, at the very least, has a strong argument for himself. And so when you're talking about an Anthony Richardson, I think it's a little bit of the modernized thinking. It's that we're not going to sit there and have to pass in the pocket a million times. And we know he's not going to have the most protection, so he's got to have good legs. Where I think a lot of the mainstream media has been caught up on Anthony Richardson is that a lot of the places where he has excelled in terms of his physical athletic ability that was displayed at the combine is that he's not going to be doing all that in the NFL. Like the broad jump, when is he going to load up and just jump super far? And, stuff like that. I think Anthony Richardson going first overall is not a terrible pick. I just think you're going to put a lot of pressure on this kid, and I feel bad for this kid in that sense. But he's the first overall pick in the NFL draft. Sucks to be you, right? No, it doesn't. You're doing great. Like you're going to make a lot of money. You make $25 million a year. Like all that's awesome. The other thing is my concern with him, and it's the same concern a lot of people had. You make a good comparison when you say Trey Lance, because Trey Lance did not have a lot of tape. Well, with Anthony Richardson, he's barely thrown the ball. 393 attempts in his collegiate career. Tom Brady in his 23-year NFL career, outside of 2008 when he played one game, and outside of 2000 when he played one game, he's never had a year where he passed for that few attempts. Even when he only played, and I'm not talking about Anthony Richardson last year because obviously college has fewer games. I'm talking about his entire collegiate career combined. And that's what concerns me with him. And even when Tom Brady had the suspension and only played 12 games in 2016, he had more attempts than that. And we have very little film of Anthony Richardson passing the ball. When he does, it can look good. He has limitations. And I don't think it's a terrible pick, though. And I'm not going to hate you for it. Like, I think it's a very interesting thing. And I think you predicting that is you predicting the modernization of the NFL, which I would not be shocked if that were the case.
Yeah, I think that you just have to, because I looked up the exact same stuff that you did in terms of him having less than 400 career attempts. Lamar Jackson in college, the guy that we compared him to, had 2 years of over 400 attempts in college, and he wound up finishing with just below 1,100 attempts. Like, he needs to throw the ball, he needs to play, and obviously, like, I think a lot of people are gonna be like, well, now he doesn't have any, like a guy who, like, we really didn't see Josh Allen burst onto the scene until he got Stephon Diggs. Like, obviously we saw him improving, but we didn't see him like move, or we didn't see him, get onto the level that he's on until they got Stephon Diggs. And then they had a guy in DJ Moore, had to trade him away. I think all the stories coming out is that they wanted to keep DJ Moore, but Ryan Poles, the Bears GM, preferred DJ Moore over another first round pick. And so the Bears wound up getting DJ Moore. The Panthers wind up, getting Panthers wind up getting Anthony Richardson, I believe. Let's move on to number 2. This one, I think it's the easiest one. They'd pick him at 1. Bryce Young going to the Houston Texans. I think he's the thing that gets thrown around. If he was 6'3" or 6'4", he's easily quarterback 1 in this draft, and I agree. But that size is going to scare a lot of people, like a lot of people. But I think, one of the benefits that he's going to have of playing in the AFC South is that division's never great. It's never I think I'm not going to go this far, at least not yet. I think the Texans could compete for that division because I don't see that division generally. There's no team outside of the Peyton Manning Colts, and even like the Peyton Manning Colts have like continuously run away with this division. It's always one of those divisions where we're looking at the end. I mean, the Titans were sitting people in week 17 because week 18 was the only game that mattered for them. Like this, it's the same division, and it happens every year. Like, it would not shock me if they finally get a quarterback in there. Davis Mills wasn't great. He wasn't horrible, but he wasn't great. I think that they're obviously going to have to pick up some pass catchers. They have a very mediocre receiving core, but one of the underrated things of this, I believe that I'm not 100% sure. I should have looked it up before, but I believe John Mechie is going to be returning this next season. He obviously missed his rookie year. I believe he was dealing with cancer. I believe he's coming back this. I believe he's coming back this season, and that was like a very good connection. Like, I could have seen, had John Mechie stayed another year and obviously not had to deal with the health scare. I could have seen him wound up, winding up being like a first round pick, because I think he was a second round pick this year. I could have seen it happening. And I think that that's a connection. He's going to be comfortable there. But also, like, I think that he's another one of those guys that, like, is very clearly like a culture guy. Talking about Bryce Young, like, he's going to come in, he's going to be a leader, year one, start one, for a team that I think, and an organization that recently like has needed it. And now they've honestly, in one offseason, it feels like they're going to bring in two alpha dogs in terms of Bryce Young, as well as D'Amico Ryans as their head coach. I've really liked their offseason, what they've done so far. They haven't been handing out huge contracts. They've been getting under the radar guys. I believe they got Robert Woods is one of those guys. They traded away Brandon Cooks. Don't love that, but he wanted out. So I think probably better. They probably could have gotten a little bit better compensation, but he's not on the roster. But it's the no-brainer pick at 2.
Well, I think he's the best quarterback in the drafts. I'm with you. I definitely think it's a no-brainer here. And when you talk about the division, any year that you have Jacksonville as the favorite, how confident are you in that? Like,
Right.
are we sold on that? Like, you're right, the division is open, and you bring in a guy like a Bryce Young, he is the most poised quarterback out of all these quarterbacks who I've seen. Right? I look at Bryce Young and I think about games where he was in a bad situation, scrambled out, kept his eyes down the field, and made something happen. He didn't have the best roster in Alabama over his last 2 seasons. And it wasn't entirely his fault that they didn't go as far as Alabama teams of old had gone. Georgia has been the new class of the SEC, of college football. And for Bryce Young to stay composed, to stay poised, I saw all of those things from him. And yes, hype makes it difficult because it's hard to see over offensive and defensive linemen, but it's worked in the NFL in the past. I think Bryce Young is going to have the best career of all these quarterbacks. I think it's a great pick.
Yeah, I think that he's one of the quarterbacks where it doesn't really matter where he goes. I think he could be just as successful in Carolina as he could be in Houston, as he could be in Indianapolis, right? Like, those are the 3 teams that we know for a fact are going quarterback. I think that he'll be successful no matter where he goes, because he's not a guy like Kyler, who like relies on his athleticism as a smaller guy. Like Bryce Young, like he can be mobile, but he's way more of like I don't want to call him a pocket passer, but he can be a pocket passer. And that's why I think that, him going to Houston and them locking down Laramie Tunsil was huge for him. There were reports that they were in discussions with the Chiefs to send Laramie Tunsil to Kansas City, but they wind up locking him down, pay him a lot, 25 a year, but he's a premier left tackle. You give him that. I think if you wind up getting him, you can get him a wide receiver in this draft. Like, it's not a great wide receiver draft, but like their next pick is at 12. And I think that there should be a wide receiver there for them to take, and late round picks, just bring in some youth, along with Bryce Young. Number 3, since we're not doing any trades, I think this is generally a pretty prime trade spot. But since I'm not doing any trades, I think that they just go best defensive player available. And normally that would be Jalen Carter, but with all the off the field stuff with Jalen Carter, Will Anderson is their pick. Will Anderson, I think going into this year, I think we all pretty much thought outside of the quarterbacks, he was going to be the number 1 player off the board. He winds up being, but it's almost a little bit by default, but that's not to take anything away from Will Anderson. He's been the best defensive player in college football pretty much for the past couple of years. I think he would have been the first defensive player. I think he would have been the first overall pick last year if he was draft eligible. Like, I think that people were talking a lot more about Will Anderson than they were talking about Aiden Hutchinson or Trayvon Walker or any of those, defensive guys that went high overall last year. But I think they go with him at 3. I know he's a guy that you had pretty high on your board. I know you were hoping he falls to Seattle. He doesn't in this mock, though.
Yeah, no, he's the top guy that I want. He didn't have the year last year that he had the year before, and I think that's why a lot of people have been down on him. Jacoby, he was my old roommate. He's a huge Alabama guy. He's like, Will Anderson not having the best year. He's one of those guys. When I look at Will Anderson, I see a guy who wrecks the game no matter what the game plan is for the offense. they're passing it, he's getting to the quarterback. If they're running it, he can find lanes to get to the running back. He can post up and get low against pulling guards and centers and even pulling tackles and power concepts. And he can blow stuff up. He is the guy I want in Seattle. Darrell Taylor sucks against the run. Uchenna Nwosu is okay, but we need a guy who can not only dominate and get to the quarterback. If Uchenna Nwosu is your top pass rusher, you're not in the best shape. If Uchenna Nwosu is your second, you're in pretty dang good shape. And that's what I wanted to do with Will Anderson. So I'd love to see him fall to Seattle. I think he's a great pick for Arizona, though.
Yeah, I know that, I think, what was it? It was when Aiden Hutchinson got drafted by the Lions. You sent me a text saying like, you're a little scared. Hey, Will Anderson goes to that division. Now you're facing off against Aaron Donald or Will Anderson or Nick Bosa. It's not looking great. Not looking super great.
We'll be fine. We got some good tackles.
You do have some good tackles. Abe Lucas, Charles Cross.
You see that one video of Charles Cross just pancaking Nick Bosa? I did. It's a pretty good video. I like it.
Pick number 4. CJ Stroud, I think, winds up going to Indy at this point. I think, again, Will Levis's slide, I don't know how far it goes, but I think that he went from being a guy who was potentially getting talked about as QB1 to now being like almost unanimously quarterback 4. But I think that the Colts really wish Anthony Richardson was still on the board. I think that would have been the one for them. But one of the things that I think helps the Colts out with getting CJ Stroud is that last year their offensive line was pretty miserable, the Colts. And generally speaking, they're one of the top units in all of football. They are one of the best. So I think him going from a place that had a top O-line to a place that potentially still could have a top O-line, I could see that, I could potentially see that happening. I could also see either Seattle or the Lions trading up to 3 to try to, if CJ Stroud falls, to try to get him at 3. I think it's less likely for Seattle. I think you and me talked about it a little bit. Like, I don't see Arizona giving Seattle their quarterback of the future. I just don't see it happening. I could see Detroit. Detroit's another team where, like, they have one of the best offensive lines in football. They have 2, like, we don't know what Jameson Williams is going to be, but we know Amon-Ra St. Brown, he's like a mid to low tier wide receiver 1. Jameson Williams, I think, easily is a good wide receiver 2. And I think that as this offense goes, and I think that, Jared Goff at quarterback, I honestly think that's a really good comp for like a guy like a CJ Stroud, where don't ask him to do too much. He can do stuff within your system. He's not going to make any spectacular plays, but he can be very solid and you can win with them. Again, the same logic I talked about with Bryce Young applies here with CJ Stroud in terms of the AFC South, man. It's not a good division. And historically speaking, now, I mean, like, we've had a couple years in a row now where, like, the picks 4 through, picks 1 through 5, there's 2 NFC or AFC South teams. It's a pattern at this point. So I think that either one of these guys, and especially with the Colts last year, if they had just gotten like comparable quarterback play, very similar to like the Jets, like, we're looking at like probably a pretty good team. They're probably competing for their division, but instead they got Matt Ryan and I'm trying to remember who else they had in just that disgusting quarterback room. And then they had Jeff Saturday as their coach. It was just a mess all the way around. Fired Frank Reich. He gets picked. He doesn't even take a year off. He gets picked up, within a couple of months.
Was it Jacob Eason? Is that who they played? I can't remember who the back was.
I don't know if it was East. No, it was Sam Ellinger. Texas. Yeah, we're back. But yeah, I think that CJ Stroud at 4 makes sense if he's there for the Colts. But I think they prefer Anthony Richardson, especially with Shane Steichen, a guy who his best years as an offensive coordinator have been with a guy who has been mobile like Jalen Hurts, and a guy who everybody talks about, Anthony Richardson, not being the most polished passer. Neither was Jalen Hurts until this offseason when he really put in the work with it. And so I think they are wishing Anthony Richardson falls to 4. And if he gets out of the top 2, Anthony Richardson, I could see them, trading up with Arizona. Yeah, just to make sure that they get their guys. So Seattle or to make sure like Seattle or Detroit doesn't wind up getting him.
Well, I really hope that they don't do that, because that feels awfully reminiscent of when the Bears traded up to number 2 with San Francisco, and San Francisco became really dominant, partially because of all the stuff they got back from that. Because they took Solomon Thomas, he wasn't spectacular, but some of those other picks they got turned into really, really impactful. Then they get Fred Warner with one of those picks. Like that,
Yeah.
I believe they did. And that's why I was like, I don't want to see someone trade up one pick to go get their quarterback when Seattle's not going to do that anyways. So I think this is if Baker Mayfield, I saw a vapor rub on the TV. If Baker Mayfield would have fallen in his draft a little bit and had a more successful situation, I think this is the comp. I think CJ Stroud falling to Indy, well, yes, they're not the best roster in the NFL. They got a weak division, and he has somewhat of a supporting cast. And so I think this is a good spot for CJ Stroud to have a successful, at least start to his career. He might start off a little bit better than some of the other quarterbacks. I don't think he's going to be the best out of this draft, but I think he could start a little bit better because he falls to here.
Yeah, no, I think that for CJ Stroud, location is really something that is going to matter for him. Where he goes and how ready the team is. I want to say, like, I don't think he could go to like a Houston and make it work. Whereas I think like Bryce Young can. Like, we haven't seen CJ Stroud, granted, probably because he hasn't gotten the opportunity, but we haven't seen CJ Stroud perform when he doesn't have a top offensive line, like, where he doesn't have two day 1 or day 2 tackles, or one of the best wide receiving cores in all of college football. Is your camera frozen? Yep. Okay, you're restarting.
Yeah, let me fix it real quick.
Okay, I gotcha. Just making sure. Yeah, I want to get you back on camera. Where we go, number 5. And number 5, I think here, we've talked about it, and you know where I'm going to go. And I think that currently the narrative that's being talked about with Seattle in terms of them taking chances on these players with character issues, I think that it's being a little bit overblown. And especially like recently, I don't think it's something that has happened too much. I think that they want to take the guy who has more of the physical traits, but also is going to be a good locker room guy, not just there, but I think a good locker room guy. And that's why I have him going Tyree Wilson and passing on Jalen Carter, which no one could have seen Jalen Carter being there for Seattle at 5, and nobody definitely could have seen him being there at 5 and Seattle still passing on him. But the draft and the pre-draft process and all the stuff that comes out, it's scary, man. It'll get pretty much everybody. Like, obviously this isn't reminiscent of Laramie Tunsil, which happened like on draft night, but it came out that he had some off the field issues, and everybody was kind of like, what? Like, okay, some team wants him. And then, at the combine, 15 minutes before he's supposed to do an interview, there's a warrant out for his arrest. But him sliding there, let's talk about Jalen Carter's slide a little bit, and then you can talk about my pick of Tyree Wilson.
Unfortunately, I think you might be right. It sucks to see this with Jalen Carter from a personal standpoint. Not just starting with him, starting first of all with the victims of the car crash who died. Those are the first concern. And then you look at what's happening to him. He's losing millions of dollars every second, kind of like a Laramie Tunsil, who you mentioned. And I definitely think he's the most talented player on the board at this pick. My concern is not that he's super out of shape, which does bother me, but it's not my biggest concern. My biggest concern is his decision making. And you're right. Seattle's taken too many guys who have questionable decision making, and it doesn't always pay out. It normally doesn't pay out. And that would be my concern with that pick here. If this were the board, I would almost want us to trade back a little bit. And I talked about it in the group chat, and everyone says, oh, you're crazy. We need a blue chipper. Well, we're not getting a blue chipper of our value. The next tier of pass rushers are all very similar. And when I look at pass rushers, I'm looking at guys who change the game, not guys who get changed by the game, right? When you look at a Michael Bennett, a guy like that, no matter where you put him, he is having an impact. And I miss having guys like him. He would find a way to make a play. It didn't matter where the scheme of the offense was running the ball. Now, with Tyree Wilson, I don't see that. I see a guy who, when he's in the right situation, when the offense calls the right play, he can have an impact. But Seattle already has those guys, Darrell Taylors of the world. Not Uchenna and Wilson to an extent, but the Puna Fords, guys who need the offense to do a certain thing to be successful. I don't see Tyree Wilson as this game wrecker, as this game changer, and I don't see him as worthy as much of that top pick as if we were to trade back a little bit. I'd feel a little bit better taking him at like 8, 9, 10. And in this mock, there'll still be quarterbacks on the board. We're not doing trades that could have changed with the 3rd overall pick. So if someone trades up to 3rd overall and Arizona, and it's not Indianapolis, and Arizona doesn't get Will Anderson and it goes quarterback, that is best case scenario, because then we get Will Anderson. If Will Anderson isn't on the board with this pick and the 3 quarterbacks who went in front of us are those 3, I really want us to trade back.
Yeah, no, I mean, I understand it. I think that the Seahawks, especially, like, we talked about it, like, adding to their interior defensive line has to be one of their biggest needs in this draft. Obviously, they signed Draymond Jones in free agency, but like they still need that. And I think that Seattle almost, like, they wouldn't use him as an edge. I think they'd use him more as a down, like not like necessarily a defensive tackle, but they'd use him as a defensive lineman.
Draymond or
Tyree.
Well, because we run the 3-4, so he'd be an edge.
Yeah. But I could definitely see them kicking him or trying to kick him inside. He's 6'6", 271. I think that those measurables is something that Seattle's going to fall in love with. And especially like here on the board, I think I've tried to talk about it, and I think, what you're referencing is kind of what I've been saying. Like, when you're up this high, you need to get a blue chipper. And although Jalen Carter is probably not going to, or he'll be there, but I don't know if they're going to take him. Like the blue chippers in terms of the defensive guys, there's 2 of them. There's Will Anderson and Jalen Carter. But I think, like, if you trade back and, if you feel pretty good about Tyree Wilson still being there, or maybe if you feel better about taking Jalen Carter at like 9, or somewhere around there, then maybe that's the goal. But I think that there's an even bigger drop off from like Will Anderson and Jalen Carter. Or I think there's a bigger drop off from like Tyree Wilson to the next guy than there is from like Will Anderson and Jalen Carter to Tyree Wilson. And again, Tyree Wilson, a lot of his stuff, it feels very Trayvon Walker-ish, where he's rising up draft boards. Because like Miles Murphy, like this was Miles Murphy's spot.
Yeah.
Like early in like the draft cycle. Like this was Miles Murphy's spot. And now he's like, we don't know where he's going to get picked.
I still like him.
Yeah. I think you'd honestly prefer a trade probably into like the mid-teens and taking Miles Murphy.
Yes.
Recouping some or getting some capital for that spot.
Give us 2 first. Like, let's get Miles Murphy and let's get Kalijah Cansey. Let's double it up.
I could see it happening. I definitely could see it happening. Pick number 6. Not going to talk too much about his off the field. We already talked about it. But Jalen Carter going to a place that has a set culture in Detroit, and again a team that might as well use every single draft pick they have on defense if they're not going quarterback. Like their defense, obviously it got better towards the end of the year, but I think they played a lot of bad quarterbacks. I don't know how much of it was the defense just really pulling it together as opposed to playing Aaron Rodgers in the worst year of his career and playing all of the other quarterbacks that they played. Daniel Jones, they played, I believe they played the Jets, and I don't even think it was Zach Wilson starting in that game. Like, they just didn't play a whole lot of fantastic quarterbacks. Sam Darnold dropped like 38 on them in that second half of the season. I think they just got to go defense and they go best player available. I could see them going corner here, but I think with how deep the corner class is, I think that they'd be willing. Like, I don't think you can find another Jalen Carter, but I think you could probably find somebody close to like a Devon Witherspoon or Christian Gonzalez in this draft. So I got Jalen Carter here at 6. Will Levis at 7. This is where his slide stops. He had a meeting I believe he's had a visit with the Raiders. This is I'll just be honest. This is the last quarterback I have going in the top or in the first round of the draft.
Yeah.
I think that the drop off after Levis is pretty severe as well. Like there's not even like one of those guys like a, you know, like Hendon Hooker or like Jake Hayner. Like the question isn't like, oh, are they going to go in the first round? It's like where on day 2 are they going to go? Like Lamar Jackson, it was like, is somebody going to trade back into the first round and get him? You know, and even like a couple of years ago, like Jordan Love, like people were like, does he go? Like I could see him going day 1. Like I don't see anybody outside of this top 4 going day 1. And if anything, from the draft I saw last year, I think teams are going to be a lot more hesitant to draft the person high just because they're a quarterback. Right. I thought that Malik Willis was going to go in the top 10. I had him going, I think it was 6 or 7 to wherever Carolina was. And he didn't go in the first 2 rounds.
Which is awesome.
Yeah. So like, I think that I could see him being the last quarterback taken. He gets to learn behind Jimmy Garoppolo. And again, this is where I just don't understand the Raiders, you know, a year ago from today or whatever, a year ago, they're a team who's going all in. And now they're a team who doesn't know what they're doing, right? They get rid of Derek Carr, and, you know, who do they upgrade to? Jimmy Garoppolo. And now they're going to draft a quarterback and a guy in Will Levis who, honestly, I think he's a guy who needs snaps. Like I think he's not like he needs to play his way into being able, you know, into being an NFL quarterback, like similar to like his comp has been Josh Allen all along, similar to a Josh Allen. Josh Allen needed snaps. He didn't need to sit. And Will Levis is going to sit, and I think that's a mistake, or they're going to have to live with the mistake of paying Jimmy Garoppolo as much money as they paid him to pretend to just be a backup quarterback.
Well, I think the big thing with Will Levis, because we all see the talent, or at least we should.
Yeah.
I think the thing with him is sometimes he overthinks things and sometimes he doesn't think enough. And I saw situations where he would not think enough and he'd try and rush for a first down, but he would fumble because he wasn't thinking and he was just being sloppy with the ball. And there were times when he would overthink he'd have an open guy, and he can throw guys open, but he would overthink it and try and go to his next read and try and create something, and it wasn't there. Like, he's had some times where he missed wide open first downs and where he missed an easy throw for a hard throw, and it bit him in the butt. And so I think if you put him in the right situation, which I don't think this is, I think Will Levis could be successful. I think you put him in Seattle, I think he could be successful. I don't think he's going to be successful on the Raiders, but I agree. I do think that's where he goes. We talk about Jalen Carter with the 6th overall pick real quick. This is an opportunity. First of all, I love the pick for Detroit because they want to win in the trenches. Not only that, but you have an opportunity to get the best defensive player in the draft 2 years in a row. And there's a case to be made for that. When you talk about Aiden Hutchinson and Jalen Carter, your defensive interior is terrifying. They're building something like San Francisco if they bring in Jalen Carter. And this team was at the top of the division last year. Not the very top, but they have an argument, and Steezy will give you that argument that they're the favorites. And I think it's very, very interesting what he would add to this team. I think both of those picks make sense.
Yeah, Carter, if Detroit gets Carter, I hope they don't take Carter, but I think that's probably where they're going to go. This draft is kind of a blend of like where I think teams are going to go and what I want. It's kind of been like where I think they'll go after pick 1. Pick 1 was all me being like, this is probably, at this point, this is what they should do. I wouldn't have traded up to 1, but since they're up at 1, like that, I think that's what you got to do. Let's move on to pick number 8. And Atlanta's a team that needs everything. They need absolutely everything. Quarterback, it seems like they're going to be fine with Desmond Ridder, but don't think that's the best idea. They should trade this pick for Lamar Jackson. They should. This and their next year's first. They should do it. It's a no-brainer. They'd have the best quarterback in the division by a mile. He would have a wide receiver 1 in Drake London. He would also have Kyle Pitts. We know how he likes his tight ends with Mark Andrews. Like I think that's a match made in heaven. You also get Arthur Smith, who's very good at designing a run game. We saw what he was able to do in Tennessee with Derrick Henry. Like, he's able to do that. Obviously, they don't have like a Derrick Henry-like back. I think they should trade this pick. But since there's no trades, I think that they're going to go with a defensive player because that's where I think they need the most help if they're not going to go quarterback. Wide receiver is definitely a possibility for him here, but I don't see a wide receiver going, at least for the next couple picks. And that's why I have a guy who's been rising on boards, and that's Lucas Van Ness out of Iowa. Big guy. I think if he's there at 15 for the Packers, I think they take him, regardless who else is on the board. I think that they're a team, and very similar to Chicago, who I thought they needed to go pass rusher earlier, or I thought that they would just trade back to probably around 4 and try to get one of those pass rushers. The Falcons had 21 sacks in 17 games last year. That's pathetic. Absolutely pathetic. And maybe Lucas Van Ness isn't going to be one of those guys who's just going to be, racking up the sacks. He only has 13 and a half sacks in his entire college career. But he's a guy who I think is going to be able to help your defense significantly. They have him listed as an edge, but I think they have him listed as an edge. I think he could also potentially kick a little bit more inside. He's 6'5", 270 pounds. He's been rising up more and more and more each week. And I think that this is probably where his stock. I think this is the top of his stock. I could see them going many different places with this pick because they need pretty much everything. I know that Chicago has more needs listed currently, but I think that Atlanta just has too many needs. I'll go with Chicago here at 9. They have a very clear need, and that's offensive line. They were not good last year. Peter Skoronski is the best tackle in this class. The only problem is that he has shorter arms, and so I could see him sliding a little bit, and I could see them taking, a guy like a Paris Johnson. I couldn't see him going like Anton Harrison or Broderick Jones. That just feels like a little bit too much of a reach. But at pick 9, it says they could go wide receiver. That would terrify me. That would if they got Jackson Smith and Jigba, I would be terrified. And honestly, I was happy, in the grand scheme of things, that DJ, because I'm a Packers fan and I really want Jackson Smith and Jigba to go to the Packers. I was happy DJ Moore was involved in that trade, so that I know that they're pretty much not going to go wide receiver at 9. That was my personal feeling on it. But I think that they need to go offensive line. It was one of the worst, if not the worst, in football. You're sticking with your guy in Justin Fields. Protect him. Protect him. You tried to. Apparently, I'm reading the story that they didn't even offer Mike McGlinchey. He obviously not a left tackle, right tackle. But they didn't even offer him. Granted, it was because Mike McGlinchey apparently said that Denver's offer was so good that he didn't even want to hear an offer from Chicago. But they had so much cap space, and this was supposed to be the year for them to spend on the offensive line. Although it wasn't a super great offensive line class, but you saw teams who wanted to get these deals done, got them done. Right? Cincinnati went and got an offensive tackle. Orlando Brown. Kansas City obviously went out. They got a right tackle, and they're flipping him over to left tackle. Teams who wanted to get it done, teams who wanted to get it done, got it done. The Bears really didn't add a whole lot to their offensive line. I think that unit's still going to be a mess, but I think that they get a nice tackle in Peter Skoronski. I'll go to number 10 here, and then I can kind of get your thoughts on the past couple of picks if you would have seen them going anywhere different. The Eagles at number 10, they have the ability to just kind of go best player available. And going into this draft, I think everybody kind of thought that pick number 10 was going to be a corner. And although they held on to Darius Slay and they paid James Bradbury, I think corner is still probably the spot they go. And I think that they take the guy who's probably the best in the draft, Christian Gonzalez. I think he's just a little bit more polished than Devon Witherspoon. I think that they'd be elated if he was still there. Like I could see in my original mock draft that I made to myself, I had Christian Gonzalez going 6 to Detroit before we kind of really knew the resolution of the Jalen Carter thing. But I think that they kind of go almost best player available in terms of Christian Gonzalez here at 10. They says they have a need at wide receiver. I think that at least maybe they could use some depth pieces at wide receiver, but I think they're already going to be hard. It's going to be difficult to spread the targets around to Dallas Goedert, AJ Brown, and Dallas Goedert, AJ Brown, and Devonta Smith as it is. I think adding another like high pick mouth to feed in that room, I think could be a little bit difficult for him. But I think that they go corner, and maybe they wind up shipping off Slay or Bradbury next off season after letting him sit behind. But they're paying way too much money for their corners, and I think that they want to get younger, and especially with them having to pay Jalen Hurts here pretty soon. I'm assuming this offseason, they're going to need to clear up some space for down the line, and I think that trading away one of those guys after this season, and then having a obviously rookie, so 4-year deal, 5th-year option, helps them do that a little bit. What do you think of the past couple picks?
Well, considering what they've lost to Saucies, I think going and getting a blue chipper is really a good idea, as it should be for a lot of teams. But the Eagles need it right now, so I think I really like that pick for the Eagles. Peter Skoronski, I think, makes a lot of sense, but I think either Chicago or Atlanta has a real possibility. And again, if Atlanta doesn't trade for Lamar Jackson, because Lamar Jackson coming to Atlanta would mean the best or second best quarterback in the NFC, and I think that's a big deal.
Yeah.
I could see Atlanta or Chicago, even though they both have a number 1 wide receiver, Quentin Johnson or Jackson Smith-Njigba. I could see either of them doing it, just saying this is the best player in the draft. And if both of them want to support a quarterback that either they have in Justin Fields or that they're going to have in whoever Atlanta gets after they decide Desmond Ridder's not it, I think that speaks volumes. I think going and get a Jackson Smith-Njigba, and I honestly, I know this terrifies you. I think it makes more sense for Chicago because they already have the quarterback, but also you bring in a DJ Moore. Justin Fields last year was Smith-Njigba's first year at Ohio State. They had some connections, but I think there's a little bit of that itch where, man, I never got to see him when he was fully hitting his stride, man. I'd love to do that on the next level. This would be the opportunity to do that. If you're leaning into Justin Fields, I definitely think he needs protection, but I also think Smith-Njigba could go there.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And again, I'm terrified that it's going to happen. I think the only reason it wouldn't is because obviously they have DJ Moore. He's under contract now. They traded what wound up being the 33rd, or I guess now it's the 32nd overall pick for Chase Claypool, which does not look like a good trade for them at all. And then they have Darnell Mooney. So I think unless they're looking at moving on from one of those guys, that's where I could really see it happen. Because I mean, eventually everybody's got to get paid, and I think we saw it in Dallas a couple of years ago, right? They moved off of Amari Cooper, or last year they moved off of Amari Cooper because CeeDee Lamb was the mouth they needed to feed. Again, there is never I think that you never actually have an issue of the too many mouths to feed. I think in terms of all that does is that's maybe more of a locker room thing as opposed to an actual play style sort of thing. I don't think that having, you think Patrick Mahomes would say no to DeAndre Hopkins, Tyreek Hill, and Travis Kelce because it's too many mouths to feed? No, he'd have fun throwing the ball all around the field. At number 10 or at number 11, sorry, let's look over the top 10 one more time. So Anthony Richardson at 1, Bryce Young at 2, Will Anderson at 3, CJ Stroud at 4, Tyree Wilson 5, Jalen Carter 6, Will Levis at 7, Lucas Van Ness at 8 to Atlanta, Peter Skoronski at 9 to Chicago, and Christian Gonzalez making it to Philly to be the cornerback 3, the 10th overall pick being cornerback 3 on his own team. That's very, very interesting. Now let's start. This is where I think the draft really starts to pick up and gets a little bit more unpredictable. I think the Titans, they paid Andre Dillard. They came in, I think they gave him it was three years. I think it was 3 years, $29 million. Not a whole lot of it was guaranteed. I think only about half of it. If I'm not mistaken, Andre Dillard is a right tackle, correct? I should know this, him being a Coug and all, but
I thought they had him at left tackle.
Did they have him at left? I know because I know he didn't. I know he didn't play a whole lot.
He was on the bench. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which side of the bench was he on?
I could see them going tackle, and that's where I have them going because I think that Dillard still could be a little unpredictable. Let's see. I could do. I think that they got to go tackle here. They got rid of Taylor Lewan. Obviously he was it was something that made sense for them. He wasn't playing super well. I believe Paris Johnson. I'm just double checking, making sure I'm not going off my mock. Paris Johnson's the pick I have him going here at 11. He's a guy that they really need. They need offense. They need a lot. Again, this division is kind of up for grabs, but they've been kind of going fire sale and nuking the team, getting rid of all the bad contracts. Derrick Henry's apparently on the trade block. I think that they might try to recoup some draft capital, but tackle and then cornerstone tackle, I think, is the next little thing on their checklist. At number 12, this is another spot where wide receiver makes sense. I've talked about it. I was kind of teasing it. Quentin Johnston is the guy I have going at pick 12. I think they just need a guy physically who is physically massive, right? Obviously, like him and Jackson Smith-Njigba. I think Jackson Smith-Njigba would clearly be the wide receiver 1 in this draft class, and I still think he is. But I think he would clearly be if Quentin Johnston didn't have the measurables that he did. I think they have him. I think they have him at 6 foot. I think he measured in at 6'3". But he has the speed. We saw him he didn't have a problem going up against, the better schools. Obviously he played very well in the college football playoff. Obviously national championship was tough. But that's what happens when you run into, when you're running into a team like Georgia. But I see them getting a pass catcher, another pass catcher, and a first-round pass catcher for their new quarterback, Bryce Young. That brings up the Jets at 13. And the Jets, I continuously talk about it. They cannot walk out of this draft if they don't trade this pick for Rodgers. They can't walk out of this draft without an offensive tackle. And Broderick Jones, I think, is the guy over Anton Harrison. I think that a lot of teams would rather go the SEC lineman as opposed to the Big 12 offensive lineman. I guess, that Oklahoma's about to be in the SEC, but for now, the Georgia offensive lineman, Broderick Jones, he hasn't played as many snaps as Anton Harrison has, but he's been a little bit more consistent throughout his years. He had his year in 2020, Broderick Jones' year in 2020 was a lot better than his last 2 seasons, but all of them have kind of, especially according to PFF, have been better than what we've seen from the other tackle from Oklahoma. I'm just completely blanking. But yeah, I have them going tackle. The Patriots at pick 14. And this is Devon Witherspoon has started to slide a little bit. And I think his slide continues just a little bit farther, because I think that the Patriots, when they're looking for a player, I think secondary is a spot that they really need. Brian Branch is definitely a guy I could see going here, trying to take over that Devin McCourty role. But I think that they like guys who have pedigree which is why Brian Branch would fit in. But also I think they like getting those guys, and I think the NFL in general does, who have family in the NFL, who have that sort of thing, which is why I think Joey Porter Jr. winds up going to them at pick 14. They do have a lot of needs. I think if Broderick Jones makes it past pick 13, or if the Packers and Jets pick swap, I think that Broderick Jones probably winds up going to New England, because they do need an offensive tackle. But I think they take the guy who they have best on their board. I don't see them going skill position like wide receiver in the first round. It definitely could happen, and it probably should happen, but that's not something I necessarily see from them. Now, the pick I've been waiting for, Green Bay at 15. You know who I want to take. Everyone knows who I want to take. That's Jackson Smith-Njigba. However, I don't think they go there. I think that we being the Packers, wind up going with your guy. I think Myles Murphy winds up being a Packer. They need pass rush, man. They were not super great sack-wise last year. They only had 34 in 17 games. They ranked down with Cleveland. We're behind Jacksonville. We're behind Carolina. I think they were bottom 6 in terms of sacks this year, which not great for a team who was trying to compete. And I think that Rashawn Gary having torn his ACL, and we don't know exactly when in the season he's going to come back. I think that throws a wrench into things. I think Preston Smith and him not being super fantastic when it comes to defending the run, and even kind of having a down a better year last year, but still like a down year from what he was back in 2019. And I think that he probably isn't on the roster next year. So I think they're going to look for a replacement for him. These past 5 picks, what have you thought? I know Quentin Johnson, I saw a little bit of a reaction, and then obviously, your guy, Miles Murphy.
No, I just thought it was convenient how you're leaving Jackson, Smith, and Jigba off the board.
Oh,
But
yeah.
I also think it's realistic, though, because I love Quentin Johnson, his style, his athleticism. That's a guy I could genuinely see going before Smith and Jigba. So I don't think that was too much of a bias pick. And I think you're being frank when you're going Miles Murphy and leaving Jackson, Smith, and Jigba. You're also trying to jinx it, which I respect. But I think it's likely that your team would go pass rush, and I think they'd see the value in Miles Murphy. I really like this run of picks. I think it's pretty accurate. Like Andre Dillard is a left tackle for Tennessee. I could see Tennessee going wide receiver too, though. That's another thing where I could see them going to Smith and Jigba or Quentin Johnson, and the Houston Texans just going with whoever's left of those two. But I think all the picks are pretty accurate, and I love Joey Porter Jr. Obviously, his brother Michael Porter Jr. in the NBA. I joke, but I love all those picks. I think you're honestly, I feel like you have a good touch on this draft through 15 picks.
Yeah, it hurts. It really does hurt to watch him, Jackson Smith and Jigba, like fall as much as he has. For me, I would take him at if I'm the Packers, I'd take him at 13. I'd take him at 15. I'd trade up and take him at 10. I would take him wherever I can get him, because I think that he's the perfect piece for the Packers offense. Then at 16, that's where I think Devon Witherspoon winds up going. The Commanders, one of their biggest needs, although it's not listed here, they need a cornerback. And Devon Witherspoon is that guy for them. They're a weird team where I just don't really know exactly what I don't want to say what they think they're doing, but I don't know how close they are really to competing in a division where I think they probably have the 4th best coach. They're in a division where their starting quarterback is worse than Daniel Jones. I think that they're worse in a lot of things, and they had an okay offseason. They re-signed Daron Payne, obviously had him on the franchise tag. But I don't know. I think that, not necessarily just talking about the draft pick, because I like the draft pick, but I think that it's weird that like they're another team who feels like they just have a lot of spots to fill. Pick 17, you go Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh offensive line has been they've been not great as a unit for the past couple of years. That's where Anton Harrison goes. Only a couple picks after the Jets contemplated taking him. And then that brings up Detroit again. And Detroit, I think Deonte Banks is the player that they go with. The corner is another one of their needs. Jeff Okudah has not been what he was supposed to be, as I believe he was the 3rd overall pick of I don't even remember what draft it was. Was it 2019? 2018? No,
I think it was 2019.
2019.
It was 3rd overall, wasn't he?
Yeah, I think. Yeah.
Well, and you're leaning into the whole Jalen Carter because of the depth of CBs, and I think it's accurate.
Yeah, and I think that them going with they need corner, they need defense. Their offense is pretty set. I mean, it wouldn't shock me if they decided to add some depth, or maybe I think in one of the ones I did, I had him going 1st round tight end. Although TJ Hawkinson and I believe it was Eric Ebron hadn't worked out to them, or hadn't worked out for them as much as they would have liked them to. But I could also see that as well as a TJ Hawkinson replacement. Because I think that tight end wise, it's a pretty good draft. It's a pretty good draft to need a tight end. And that's where I have the Buccaneers going. Dalton Kincaid, going to Tampa. I like their tight ends, but I think that they wind up going tight end. As somebody who's watched a whole lot of UW football, Cade Otton, I think, can wind up really being a guy for him. But he didn't look great last year. Him and Brady were not on the same wavelength, and obviously Brady's not there anymore. But I still see them being in a spot where I think Baker Mayfield he's going to need some targets. I think they could potentially. I don't want to say tear it all down after this year, but it wouldn't shock me if Mike Evans or Chris Godwin wound up, on the trade block around the trade deadline if stuff's not going particularly well. Just if stuff's not going super well, but the first round or the first overall pick is an insight, because obviously if Caleb Williams, you're looking down the barrel at Caleb Williams, who would probably want to have as many weapons as you possibly could have for them. But yeah, I'm Dalton Kincaid at pick 19. Pick 20, your Seattle Seahawks. With the board where it's at, where would you like to see them go?
One of two places. I look at two guys on the screen right now, Kalijah Kancey or Brian Bresee. I think both of those guys could be huge. I think Kancey, part of the problem with him is that he's getting all these, he does exactly what Aaron Donald does. Don't do that to guys. He's not going to be Aaron Donald. And when you do that, you're expecting something that he's not. I think Kancey would probably be my top pick between the two of them. Isn't he a little bit bigger than Bresee?
In terms of Kancey's he might weigh a little bit more, but Kancey, the big thing. Oh no, never mind. The big thing with Kancey is he's undersized. Like, that's why he's getting all these Aaron Donald comps, is because he's a player from Pitt. He's an undersized defensive lineman, similar to Aaron Donald.
When I say big, I meant more proportionally.
Oh,
I meant because you look at his height, he's only 6'1", but he's 280.
Yeah.
So that roundness. Right. That roundness, we put him in our interior. I am concerned, though, that he is too light. I'd probably say, it's so close. I might say Bresee. I'm worried about his injuries. He's not going to be done with his injuries in the NFL. You don't get healthier in the NFL, but we do need someone right there in the middle. And Bresee did a really nice job of playing off of Myles Murphy, and I love that about how he played. I feel like he impacts the game so much. I would be okay with either pick. But considering we really need interior, I'd be, like I said, I'd be fine with the stoutness of a Kancey, probably Bresee, though, but by a hair.
Yeah, that's not where I have him going with either. I have him going with the Dallas Cowboys pick of wide receiver when you don't really need one. Jackson Smith-Njigba, my favorite player, winds up a Seahawk.
You're trying to jinx things on all different levels.
You know what? It's, yeah, I am actually. I really don't want to see this happen, especially because I think he's a wide receiver who you and I talked about. You and I talked about with the Packers, like having a guy when Devontae Adams could, score a touchdown before the snap is what we talked about. And then Christian Watson, he's a guy who could score it after with his speed, his game-breaking ability.
Before and after he gets the ball.
Sorry. But I think Jackson Smith-Njigba is a Devontae Adams-like player. Like, he's not overwhelming with the speed. He ran a 4.53, or I believe it's been reported anywhere in a range from like 4.48 to 4.53. And again, if we're discussing a 500ths of a second, dude's probably pretty fast. Like, it wasn't a 4.8, like it was a 4.53 at worst. And so I think that Seattle going there, I think that just like they're preparing a little bit for the eventual Tyler Lockett departure, or not like they're going to cut him or trade him, but he's getting up there in age, and especially wide receivers. I believe, is he 30 or is he 29?
Lockett, I believe he's 29.
He's 29. But he's coming up on 30, and usually, just generally speaking, wide receivers, once they hit 30, are not the same. And especially like last year, he dealt with a little bit of injury issues, or he was injured a little bit. I wouldn't call him injury issues, but he was injured a little bit. And so I see Seattle going Jackson Smith-Njigba, who was just the best player on the board for him. I see them going him with JSN there.
I was wrong, by the way. He's 30.
He's 30. Okay. I think that they wind up going Jackson Smith-Njigba. What is your thoughts on my pick for your Hawks? I know that you wanted interior offensive line, or sorry, interior defensive line, but
here's the thing. I wouldn't be shocked if we went defensive interior, like at least front seven for our first three picks. That's where I want us to go. If we found a way to fill out it, this pick entirely depends on what we do for the rest of the draft, and if we were able to trade back with our first pick. We went defensive interior with our first pick in this mock. I think Smith-Njigba is a number 3, soon to be a number 2. I don't hate that at all. Like, I love Smith-Njigba. I just for this offense, we do not pass the ball enough for all that. I would be super excited to have arguably the best receiver in the draft, though.
Yeah. No, I'm hoping this doesn't happen. I'm hoping the Packers take him at 15 and then I don't even have to worry about this. But if JSN is on the board and it's pick 20, I'm going to be sweating like a lot. This I think starts a little bit of a run on receivers. At 21, the thing that the Chargers need the most is somebody explosive. Mike Williams is not explosive. Keenan Allen is for sure not explosive, but Zay Flowers is explosive. 4.42 40-yard dash. He's not the biggest guy in the world, but I don't know if they necessarily have, they being the Chargers, have like a benchmark of like, what the measurables on a guy have to be to take them in the first round. So I think that they wind up going Zay Flowers. And immediately after them, I have the Baltimore Ravens getting another first round wide receiver for Lamar Jackson and going Jordan Addison. Addison, he did not help himself at the combine at all. Because he was in that discussion of like, is he wide receiver one? For a little bit, it was like him, or it was like him. It was JSN. It was Quentin Johnston, and now I think he winds up as the fourth wide receiver taken off the board again with no trades. I don't think he helped himself enough, but man, he's not very big, 5'11", 173. And listen, everybody wants to, well, Devonta Smith was, he was how light he was. Well, Devonta Smith also did it at Alabama. And if you can do it at Alabama, you can pretty much do it anywhere. Whereas Jordan Addison did it at Pitt. And then at USC, he didn't really have, he didn't have a super great year. Obviously, even with like Caleb Williams as his quarterback, he wasn't like outstanding. So I think Jordan Addison winding up going to Baltimore. So then they'd have, I believe it was Rashad Bateman. They'd have Jordan Addison if they're able to retain Lamar, which I believe in this draft, or at least as of right now, they have Lamar and they are planning on keeping Lamar. I think that's where they go. Brian Bresee is my next pick for the Minnesota Vikings. That, speaking of a team that needs defense, they need defense. They've gotten rid of Eric Kendricks. Patrick Peterson signed elsewhere. It wouldn't shock me if this is one of the last couple of years of Harrison Smith. They're a team who needs to just load up on defense. Like it's not a coincidence that their needs are defensive line, linebackers, and cornerbacks. All the positions on the defense outside of safety. That's where they need to go. That's where they do go. Pick 24. They're the team who I think is the most guard needy left on the board. There's not a whole lot of interior offensive linemen ranked super highly. Obviously, they're not. It's not as coveted as of a position, so they usually don't go first round. But Osiris Torrance, I think, winds up going to Jacksonville at 24. 25, this is where the first tight end goes off the board. I think Michael Mayer goes to them.
Second, you gave one to Tampa Bay.
Oh, that's right. Sorry. Second goes off the board. I think they go Michael Mayer because I think that although they did just trade for Darren Waller, I think that they want a backup plan for Darren Waller. And I also think Brian Daboll could run a pretty nasty system with two tight ends trying to be a little bit more heavy personnel, 12 personnel, running the ball with Saquon Barkley to try to keep the ball out of Daniel Jones' hands. Because here's one thing that I do think happens. Like, I think if a wide receiver is there, like if Jordan Addison or Zay Flowers slips, I could see them going wide receiver at 25. But I do think that Brian Daboll is smart enough to know, like, Daniel Jones is never going to be like a 4,500 yard passer for 30 something touchdowns and 10 or fewer picks. Like, that's just not going to happen. And I think that he'll realize that keeping the ball on the ground, and a guy like Michael Mayer, he's an all around tight end. Like, he's a very classic tight end. All the comps are like Jason Witten, a guy who's like, he's going to move the sticks. He's not going to do anything super flashy, but he's going to be super solid for you. And he's reliable, which is something that Darren Waller isn't. And so maybe they don't go tight end here because they're going to bet on Darren Waller, but it's not like they gave up a whole lot of draft capital for Darren Waller. So I don't think it's that big of an investment to the point where taking a tight end here like means that they're out on Waller or that they don't believe in Waller. But I think that they could run a very nice two tight end system. Here at 26, it's a pick I've talked about a lot. Bijan to Dallas. It makes them a scary team, a really scary team. They wind up having, I think they'd have a top 5 running back in the league his rookie year. I think he could go for. It wouldn't shock me if he went for over 1,400 yards. He was ridiculous at Texas. He stays in the state. He goes to Dallas, and then it also gets them off the hook for. I don't think they'll pay Tony Pollard next year if they don't come up to a deal, or if they don't have a deal with him before the draft, and Bijan's there, and they take Bijan. I don't think they get a deal with him. I think they just let him ride it out on the franchise tag this year. He hits free agency next year, goes and gets paid, because you and me talked about it. He hasn't had a game where he's had over 17 carries in his college or pro career. He hasn't, and that's scary. Versus Bijan, I mean, how many 20 carry games did Bijan have just in college? Like, Bijan Robinson was the best back in college football. He's a guy he's ranked super highly by a lot of people in terms of just having he's ranked super highly just in terms of him being a prospect, but him being a running back kind of bumps him down the list. So like best player available, he's probably not going to get taken until, like, I could see a team like Philadelphia, like, who just has a pick to burn, being like, screw it, like, let's take him. But I think if he falls to Dallas, it gets really scary. Like, even just like last year, and you and I talked about his carries. He only had 2 games last year where he didn't have at least 17 carries.
Well, this draft pick instantly makes him the offensive rookie of the year.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. For sure. It's something that makes them, I think it makes them as real as they've been since 2016. I think that they kept all of their main pieces on defense. They got Leighton Vander Esch back on a cheap deal, Donovan Wilson back on a cheap deal, traded for Stephon Gilmore. They've added Brandon Cooks. If they're able to do this, and they kept Dan Quinn, and I think that's the biggest part of all of it, is that they kept Dan Quinn. Now they're going to go in, and yeah, I know a lot of people don't love Dak, but I think that Dak has been a lot of teams. I think there's 22 teams who would rather have Dak than the quarterback they currently have. Like, he's a top 10 quarterback. Does that mean that he's on the same level as Patrick Mahomes? No. Or Josh Allen? No. Or Burrow or Herbert? But like, once you start getting to a guy like, and you're taking everything into account, like, I think he's probably on the same level, all things considered, as Lamar.
You give Dak Stephon Diggs, who wants to be there.
Right.
I think there's an argument for him versus Josh Allen. And
I'm not going to go that far, but I could see it. Like, Josh, with how, like, here's the thing with Josh Allen, the whole like turnovers thing, like, that's him. Like, that is Josh Allen. We saw it early in his career. We saw like 1 year where he didn't do it, and then it came back this year. Dak Prescott hasn't been a high turnover guy. He has not. Everybody will try to tell you differently, but he has not been a high turnover guy. And he led the league in picks this year and only played in 12 games and yada, yada, yada. But like, he is a good quarterback in this league. He's a top 10 quarterback in this league. And I think that if you surround him with the talent that Dallas is able to, because again, right now, let's like look at this offense. Their offensive line is aging. So offensive line here, if they didn't go Bijan, would make some sort of sense. They went Tyler Smith last year. And I think that offensive line depth is something that they're going to want to do probably later in the draft. But Brandon Cooks is your number 2 and Gallup is your number 3 with CD as your 1. You're looking pretty good. If they go tight end here, you're still probably looking pretty good. They'd still need to add another running back at some point, because Pollard obviously is not going to be getting all the carries. But they become a very scary team in the NFC, a really, really scary team. And then Buffalo, the team we were just talking about, the team that we were just talking about with Josh Allen, they get him not necessarily help on the offense, but on the defense. Jordan Poyer, he signed a 2-year contract with them. And Micah Hyde, he dealt with some injuries last year. And I think that he's been, it's something that he has not been as consistent the past couple of years. And I think at some point they're going to try to move off of one of those two. Obviously, Poyer's getting up there in age. So taking a guy like a Brian Branch, who is going to be able to be so versatile in the way that they do things. So if Poyer goes down, or if a Micah Hyde goes down, they have a guy who can fill in there, but he can also fill in as like a nickel guy, or a slot corner. Like I think that's where originally I had him going within like the top 15, but I just don't know if there's a spot for him until Buffalo, who doesn't have a whole lot of needs. I think they could probably use another wide receiver because Gabe Davis is just, he's not the answer, I don't think, for him. In terms of a number 2 wide receiver, I think he's very good at being maybe like a number 3. But as a number 2, I can't see it for him. Then let's go last 4 picks of the first round here. We have the Bengals here at 28. I think they go Kancey. I think that they need some help beefing up their defensive line. I think they take the best interior defensive lineman available. But they do have a lot of needs. Like if Branch falls past them, I could easily see Branch going there because they lost Von Bell, they lost Jesse Bates. They could definitely use that. This is where the Saints make a pick. You and I were kind of talking as I was making this pick. I told you about Emmanuel Forbes, cornerback out of Mississippi State, who is just light, very, very light, 6'1", 166, but has a 4.35 40-yard dash. And the reason I think that he winds up going here, the reason that I think he goes here to the New Orleans Saints is because of a guy like the Packers took a couple of years ago, Eric Stokes, a guy who was a borderline 1st or 2nd round guy. Obviously, Stokes was heavier, was about 30 pounds heavier, but a dude who was just blazing fast. And I think that they're in a spot where they're in salary cap hell. They are in absolutely horrible, and in an absolutely horrible spot when it comes to their. They're in an absolutely horrible spot when it comes to their salary cap. And I think that they're going to have to start moving off of guys, or maybe they still think they can compete right now and they'll continue to try to push it down the road. But I think that they need to add some depth to that spot and give Marshawn Lattimore just a little bit of help, because that secondary over the past couple of years has gotten a lot more thin than I think a lot of people realize, like getting rid of CJ Gardner-Johnson and guys like that. I think that they have not been the same Saints secondary that we had like a couple of years ago, where they were just where they were locked down and they had a lot of depth. And this is where the Eagles, man, this draft board has fallen very nice for them. I think that they have gotten the chance to go best player available twice. I think that they did it with Christian Gonzalez at 10. And I think they add some edge rush depth with Nolan Smith. He's undersized, but I think that Philly is one of those teams who I don't know how much they're going to care about that, especially when they can use him as like a rotational pass rusher. They can throw him in there with Hassan Reddick and be fine. And have him go for a little bit, because Nolan Smith is so explosive. And so I think that adding him onto a team that already they had 70 sacks just in the regular season last year, 15 more than the next team which was Kansas City. I think adding a pass rusher like Nolan Smith, that makes a lot of sense. And then the final pick of the first round, obviously, only 31 picks because of the Dolphins forfeiting their pick, is Kansas City, and Kansas City also gets to go best player available. They don't go Clyde Edwards-Helaire like they did a couple of years ago after winning the Super Bowl, but I do think they go Will McDonald, who's been rising up draft boards out of Iowa State. Let's take a look at that final draft. Can get it put up here. That's what I have everybody doing. But yeah, Will McDonald, I think, winds up going there. They add some more edge depth. They've gotten rid of, or they cut Frank Clark, so that's where he fills in. But yeah, I'll walk through the draft one more time. Anthony Richardson at 1 to Carolina, Bryce Young at 2 to Houston, the pick that I think we've all had for a very long time. Will Anderson at 3 to Arizona, CJ Stroud at 4. Wind up going to the Colts. Tyree Wilson winds up going to Seattle at 5. Jalen Carter, his fall only goes till 6. Will Levis is 7. Lucas Van Ness at 8. Peter Skoronski at 9. Christian Gonzalez to the Eagles at 10. Then we get a nice, or Paris Johnson to the Tennessee Titans at 11. Quentin Johnston helping out his new franchise quarterback, Bryce Young, at 12. Broderick Jones, Jets go and tackle at 13. Joey Porter Jr. at 14. Miles Murphy at 15. Devon Witherspoon at 16, they wind up getting their corner. And then you could take a look at the second half of the draft. We get a nice little run on receivers there from 20 to 23 with JSN, Zay Flowers, and Addison going to Seattle, the Chargers, and Baltimore, respectively. Bijan at 26. That's my favorite pick of this entire draft. Yeah. What do you think?
I think you did, man. You've been on a roll. I think it makes a lot of sense. Even though I'm not in love with Seattle's picks, I could see them happening. And, we're wearing two different shades of green, but we got similar takes on the draft, man. I think you did a pretty good job of quantifying it, just like the other day you did a pretty good job of quantifying what Rodgers' trade value is right now. So you're on a roll.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that the one that I thought was going to be the hardest to convince was Anthony Richardson at 1. But I think as I tried to make it, I'm like, yeah, I do think, like, I think it makes a lot of sense. You don't trade from 9 to 1, give up all the stuff you did to take a quarterback who I think his ceiling is B+. Like, you just don't do it, right? It's obviously not on the same level as like a Mitch Trubisky sort of trade, but like you're taking a guy again whose best is like, like that's pretty good. Like, you know what I mean? I think that's the spot they have to go. What's your favorite pick in the entire mock?
Well, I like the boldness of the Anthony Richardson. I love Bijan Robinson. Here, scroll through it. Yeah. Give me a nice look so I can just tell you. I want to go something different than what you said. In this mock, honestly, I really love pick 30. I think putting a Nolan Smith in Philly, I think they really need him. And I think Philly has a knack of just getting their hands on the best picks. I love Jalen Carter to Detroit. Yeah. Let me just go. That's my favorite pick. You know why? Because I apparently Steezy has the Vikings. You got Green Bay. Screw Dylan. He can have Chicago. I want Detroit. Give me Detroit. They're so fun. They did us a huge favor last year. I love watching Detroit football. Like I love the way they play.
It seems like you and Steezy are teaming up with Detroit now because he's off his Minnesota bandwagon. He's on the Detroit one all of a sudden.
Well, it's just anyone but Green Bay, honestly. But Chicago's colors are so ugly to me.
Yeah.
I'll take. I think Minnesota is the best colors in the division. I think Detroit is a close second. I'll take Detroit. I love the Jalen Carter pick and what that does for this team, who is really building a dominant interior offensive and defensive line.
Yeah, I think that it makes them a lot scarier, and doing that, and then also being able to add a cornerback later in the draft in Deonte Banks. Like if they take a Christian Gonzalez, or let's say they love Devon Witherspoon and they take him at 6. I don't know if they'll get like in this draft, Kalijah Kancey fell to 28, but I could see some team taking him before 18, depending on need. Yeah. And then then they get the corner, but then they don't get that. In this draft, they get both. I think the only pick I'm super like shaky on is, man, I don't know what the Falcons do. I don't know.
I think they go with, honestly, I thought they'd go with Christian Gonzalez. I thought they go with an elite, because
pair him up really with AJ Terrell,
best player available, and I don't think Lucas Van Ness is the best player at that pick.
Yeah, I could definitely see it. I think the only other pick outside of Bijan, the one that I really love, it's one you were like skeptical of. You made a face. Quentin Johnson at 12, I think makes Houston like not
thought
legit.
He would go before that. That was the other guy I could see at 8.
Yeah, I don't know in this wide receiver class. Like, I don't know if they're gonna fly off the board as early as like we see in normal years. Like, very similarly, obviously not to this extent, but to the quarterback class last year, where it's like if the guy's not there, we're not, like, if he's not worth it, we're not taking him. As opposed to like in years, there's no Jamar Chase of this class where we're taking him at 5. That's probably next year's class with Marvin Harrison Jr. He's going to go top. He'll be a top 5 pick, I believe. But like, we just don't have that this year. And, so I think that we are much more likely to see something like how I have it, where we have, one receiver in the top, one receiver in the top, basically 19, and then we see a run on them in the late first round. Maybe even seeing like Buffalo take one, or maybe the Bengals, if there's a guy they like, they do that and ship out T. Higgins and recoup some draft capital, or hell, who knows? Kansas City could take one. Like it would not shock me. For as many holes as we thought this team had last year, like I don't see a whole lot for them this year. They can very much so go best player available, and when you're the defending Super Bowl champs, there's not a whole lot of there's not going to be a whole lot of argument to whatever your pick is going to be. But yeah, no, that's my mock draft. I'll post it on the socials later. Noah, thank you for stopping on this early morning episode. Went a lot longer than I thought it was going to. I think we spent like 30 minutes on the top 4 picks alone.
Yeah.
Yeah, had to speed it up there a little bit. But yeah, no, it's always fantastic to have you on.
It's a good pace, buddy. I thank you for having me. You invite me so much, and I always say no, and I feel so bad. So I am very grateful to be able to join you here today.
Of course. I know we'll try to do a Bolt mock draft. That would be fun. Going back and forth like we did last year. I'm just
we'll do it. Sign us up. We're doing it.
I'm just hoping I'm going to try it. We just got to find a day that we can all be there, and like Steezy can get there on time, and
we'll just make it pick last.
Oh yeah, no, we just each get, instead of getting like going one by one, it's just I get the first 8, you get the next 8, he just gets the last 8. He gets picked 24 through, or I guess maybe 7.
That would be so boring though, because then we could decide who. That's true. We could cheat. So I think what we would do is,
you're like, at number 1.
We do like a live, like every single time Steezy wasn't there for the pick, we do like a live spin of the wheel for who gets it.
Oh, that'd be good. That'd be good. That'd be good. Let's figure out a date to do that, because we still have over a month until the draft, or I think it's a month tomorrow. I think it's a month tomorrow until the first round of the draft. I'll be doing my live stream. You're welcome to come on and see the Seahawks take Tyree Wilson at 5.
I'm more excited about the Packers pick. That's what I want to be here for. Last year it was classic.
After last year, after getting blocked by Quay Walker on Instagram, it's a fun time. Yeah, the crazy thing is, like, that's the pick that's the clip that went, got picked up. Well, I was shocked that it was that one, and not, because I reacted way more to the Devonta Wyatt pick.
That was hilarious, bro.
Yeah.
Just invite me like as soon here. I want to be there for the pick, and then if it's just a really good pick, I'll leave.
Oh, okay. Yeah. They get, whoever the best player on the board is, they actually make like a good, they get Miles Murphy.
They get DSN. They get DSN.
If they get JSN, I'll be obnoxious. If they get JSN, I will be so obnoxious. I'll be pushing my Packers winning the division propaganda. The whole 9 yards. I'm not going to go as far as making them, having them go to the Super Bowl like I did this year. I'm not going to go that far.
All right.
But I'll Christian Watson, JSN, Romeo Dobbs. All I'll need to see is like Jordan Love completing a pass to JSN just in shorts, not even pads, just like OTAs, and I'll just be like, this Super Bowl. I could get there. School. I could get there. Oh yeah, no, doesn't even have to be. They don't even have to be wearing. They could be wearing their college, colors. They don't even have to be wearing Packers colors. I'll be just in love with it. All right, but thank you guys for tuning in to the Emmitt Sevores Show, episode 11. My mock draft. If you want to watch, I'll should have any clips for this uploaded. Noah, again, thank you for coming on. I really do appreciate it. I'll have you back on. We'll be back for the Bolt on Friday. Thank you guys for tuning in. We'll see you next time.